Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Janet Napolitano. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you.
Well, I don't know whether to call you Madam President, Madam Secretary. You are here to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Santa Fe's Council on International Relations. They're lucky to have you, so are we. Welcome back.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm looking forward to being with the council this evening, and it's always great to be in New Mexico.
Well, you do have New Mexico roots.
I do.
So let's talk a little. I've got to give people some of your background. You were the first woman attorney general in Arizona. You were governor of Arizona. You were secretary of the National Department of Homeland Security. Also the first woman secretary. You are the president of the University of California system. You will tell us what that means. You're also the first woman president there. But you have New Mexico roots. Tell us what your connection is here, and welcome home.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I grew up in Albuquerque. We moved there when I was moving from first to second grade, and my dad was taking a position at the then newly established School of Medicine at the University of New Mexico. So I went to Bandelier and Comanche Elementary Schools and Madison Junior High and Sandia High School.
And at Sandia, you got 2 awards. You were voted most likely to succeed. They were right. Also the best musician in the senior class.
Yeah.
Well, your dad was much beloved here. Many people called him the face of medicine in New Mexico. So tell me about your dad. He came here. He's one of 7 founding faculty members of the UNM Medical School, right?
That's right. You know, when you go to the North Campus of the university now, and you see all the buildings and the hospital and the cancer center, et cetera, that's now. But then, now we're talking back in the mid '60s. It was a mortuary and a 7-Up bottling plant, and they found 7 faculty from around the country who were willing to move out here from some very good institutions of medicine, but who all wanted to do something special here with medical education. And Dad was one of them, and spent his career there.
So his name was Leonardo, or Len. They called him Dr. Len Napolitano.
They call him Dr. Knapp. A lot of people just call him Dr. Knapp.
And it was interesting because he was a PhD in anatomy. He was an anatomy teacher. He wasn't really a doctor.
That's right. He was not an MD. He was a PhD, and in medical school land, that's not unprecedented, but somewhat odd to have a PhD as the head of the medical school.
Well, his style, because I knew him, and many people who are listening will have known him too. He had been proud of being a quarterback when in college, and he continued that team building and that really innovative approach to everything he did. He put us on the map for his innovative teaching curriculum, because no one else had done that. Mm-hmm. And then also, he was named the first living legend by the medical school in 2009.
That's right.
And he was 22 years he was dean.
That's a long time to serve as a dean, and the medical school grew exponentially. He came up to Santa Fe during the session to talk with legislators about what the needs of the school were, and I think he was a natural politician in his own way.
I think he was very much, and even when he was doing the politics at the medical school, there were poker games involved, and just such intimacy. I mean, people just really worked together as a team. But what a difference he made. He instituted, or got the lawmakers to institute, the cigarette tax to help fund some of his health initiatives.
And what was really funny about that is he was a heavy smoker.
He was.
Which, you know, we tried so hard to get him to stop smoking, but that was his one vice. But then he went up and lobbied for a cigarette tax so that it could go to the medical school.
And also he set up the office of the medical examiner. We didn't have that. The cancer center
right.
was one of his creations. And now we are on the map for the quality of our cancer center.
That's right, and I don't know whether Dr. Cheryl Willman is still the head
Oh,
of it.
she is. She's
but
doing
she's
wonderfully.
terrific and wonderful faculty. And Dr. Roth is now the dean of the medical school, Paul Roth, and I think they're continuing some of the traditions, but also charting new ways because it's a fast-changing field, and you can't just be stagnant. You got to keep moving.
So, given the magnitude of his personality and his ability to get things done, how much are you your father's daughter? Because look at what you've been able to get done.
Well, I think we have some characteristics that are somewhat the same. I've never been a smoker, I must say.
Probably not a quarterback
And
either.
probably not a quarterback, but he definitely was a big influence on me. And, it's something to grow up in a household where the dinner time conversation is about what are you doing to build something, create something, think about how do you improve the state that you're living in. My mother was the same way. My mother was very active in a number of things in the Albuquerque area, was one of the founding people involved with the Museum of Albuquerque, which is down by Old Town now. So between the two of them, I got a really great upbringing, really focused on the notion of public service.
Well, I want to thank you for those years of public service. So you moved to Arizona. You became the first woman attorney general there. Mm-hmm. Then you were governor of Arizona. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about some Western issues because you're a New Mexican, and then you lived in Arizona. Now you're in California. But I would love, based on your experience, some insight into what you think are some of our pressing issues. But I've got one I've got to ask you about first. Immigration, refugees, and migrants. So we've had this situation in Europe, although, that's outside of our realm, but to see those pictures of those families literally running for their lives. And then in this last year, we had all those families with children, unescorted children coming here seeking asylum. So you have had so many years in the trenches dealing with this, because even when you were governor of Arizona, you started some really fresh new programs. How do you see all this, and do you have any advice for us?
Well, I think first of all, immigration is a difficult issue because there are competing values that become enmeshed. One value is the humanitarian value, and we see that expressed very clearly in the unaccompanied children issue, the migrants from Syria and Libya, etc., who are being forced out of dangerous homelands to new places to protect their children, their families. So that's one set of issues. Another is economic. What are the economic impacts of immigration? A third for the United States is, well, what does an immigration policy require? I think every country is entitled to have and should have immigration laws. That's a part of being a sovereign nation. However, our law is so badly out of tune with current economics and our values that one wonders how long it will take our Congress to actually take it up. And I was disappointed, frankly, and I'm speaking for myself now, but I'm disappointed that apparently the new Speaker of the House, one of the promises he's made is that immigration won't come to the floor of the House until there's a new president.
You had said immigration is a political issue, and how dare we, manipulate and maneuver our political issues on the backs of children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the children are the toughest. And one of the things, when I was at the Department of Homeland Security, of course, there you have the mission of how do you operate the legal immigration process, the visa process, mm-hmm. et cetera, but also enforcement of this law that has some real out of tune, out of touch aspects to it. And the one population there that to me had such a claim on our values were children who had grown up in the United States. Their parents were undocumented, thus they're undocumented. What do you do with those? And one of the things we started when I was secretary was something called DACA. It stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And really what it is a program where young people can come in. They have to meet certain criteria, but they're pretty basic criteria, and if they meet those, they're entitled. They get a deferred action award. They're entitled to stay in the country, and they can actually apply for work authorization. So at the University of California, now we probably have in our student body more than 3,000 undocumented students who are DACA students, and they don't have to walk around wondering whether they're going to be picked up or they get stopped for a traffic violation, whether all of a sudden they're going to be deported. So at least you remove the specter of enforcement for that population. Now, President Obama, by executive order, has tried to expand that to the parents of these young people through DAPA, Deferred Action for Parents, etc. The courts have held that up, so that program is not in effect right now.
In this campaign, there's a lot of issues. Well, Jeb Bush started throwing around the term anchor babies. And so how does that fit into this, besides being a very unfortunate term?
Well, I think, and again, in a presidential election, it's really hard to talk about nuance and about all the different issues that go under the rubric immigration, because not everybody is positioned the same. And so it's very easy to say, look, if a young person was brought here and they've done everything we've asked, they've stayed in school, they got good grades, they did everything that has been required of them, why should the law be taken out on their backs? Mm-hmm. And that was why we did DACA. We now see in the current election, unfortunately, immigration just becomes a label, and it's not really a discussion about what is the right immigration policy for the United States in this day and age. And unfortunately, I don't think we'll see that kind of policy debate until at least until we're through with the primaries.
And those candidates who want to build a wall, I think you're famous for saying, yeah, for every 10-foot wall, there's a 12-foot ladder.
Right.
Yeah.
I just, anybody who knows the border, and New Mexicans know the border,
Mm-hmm.
and Arizonans know it, Californians know it to some degree, and through my various career iterations, I've walked that border. I've ridden a lot of it on horseback, actually, or by air, gone over it by helicopter, etc. So I know it very well. And just geologically and geographically, the notion that you're going to build a wall makes no sense. What you ought to be thinking about is, well, what does a 21st century border look like? How should it operate? And how do we acknowledge in a better way that we have massive ports of entry along that border, and there's a lot of commerce that needs to be able to go back and forth. In Arizona, Mexico was our number one trading partner.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the same for New Mexico, I have to think. So you have a trading partner right on the other side of that border. That needs to be acknowledged and reflected in immigration law as well.
Well, we're speaking today with Madam President, Madam Secretary Janet Napolitano. We're talking a little bit about some issues in the West. So you mentioned the economic aspect of immigration and border security. What about of the economy in general? Because I know in California, you've been having huge economic problems, plus the drought. I know you can't do anything about the drought, but have you found a way that the western states could perhaps work together to shore up our economies?
When I was governor, the western governors used to meet, together to talk about those sorts of things. California's kind of a different place. It's so big, and there's so much going on. And there are parts of California where the economy mirrors that of New Mexico or Arizona. There are parts like Silicon Valley or Los Angeles and the movie industry that are really specific to California. But when we move on to something like climate and weather, now all of a sudden that doesn't stop at a state border, right? That is a reflection of a lot of what's going on. And actually one of the things I'm going to discuss tonight in my talk at the Council on International Relations is climate as a risk. It's a security risk, it's an economic risk, and what can we do about it?
Well, another thing I'd like your opinion on, since all of your life you've been pushing for education, and now as head of the University of California systems, have you looked at our public education system, and how is higher education the answer to so many of the problems that are facing us?
It's interesting when after the president was reelected and we were discussing my staying on in the cabinet, and I that I would stay a while longer, but I thought DHS could use some fresh eyes and somebody who'd had a full night's sleep, because when you're the DHS secretary, it literally is a 24/7 job. People use that phrase all the time.
No, but
now I know what it really means.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I got to thinking about what I had enjoyed doing over the course of my career. And when I was governor, I really enjoyed working on higher education because I thought you could do more there in the near term, because public universities are such engines of mobility, and they always have been. And, now in our country, we're worried about this growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. And one of the tried and true strategies for bridging that gap has always been access to public higher education. So I had always enjoyed working on those issues. We were building Arizona State University, building it out and growing it in massive ways when I was the governor there. And I really wanted to move back west. And I got a call from a headhunter, and California was looking for a president, and things worked out. But it's because of that notion that higher ed fills so many roles. When you're a research university, you're focused on innovation, new things, creating new knowledge. It is, as I mentioned before, it's a social mobility engine in massive ways. And when you look at the California economy, and you look at where it's really booming, all of those places marry up pretty well with a campus of the University of California. Now, I don't think that's any surprise.
Well, tell me, it's a huge system, so how many students do you have? How many staff do you have? How many campuses do you have?
It's 10 campuses, which includes 5 academic health centers, big teaching hospitals. We have relations with 3 of the national labs, including Los Alamos here, Lawrence Berkeley, and Lawrence Livermore. And we also run the state's agricultural natural resources program, the land grant aspect of higher education for California. We have 240,000 students. 190,000 or so are undergraduate, then the rest are in the graduate programs or in the professional schools, and commonly regarded as the best public research university, not just in the country but in the world.
And staff, because you did something pretty wonderful for your staff. You raised the minimum wage. Congress was doing nothing, and
Right.
you, as this large institution, talk to me about that decision.
Yeah, we instituted what we call the Fair Wage, Fair Work Plan for our staff, and recognizing that our universities are really miniature communities, and they're as large as cities. They're as large as a lot of cities in New Mexico, for sure. And so we adopted a minimum wage plan, meaning that we will work over the next 2 years to raise our minimum wage to $15 per hour, and that we would require our contractors to also pay that wage, and that we would be checking out on our contractors or checking up on them to make sure that was happening.
Well, that's a huge economic development move in all those communities where you have staff.
That's right. And again, it's about fairness, and it's about recognizing that it's almost impossible to live in the United States of America on the current minimum wage. And so as a university, we should constantly be thinking about ways to lead, and this was one way to lead.
And another way that you lead is with all these scientists, you are saying we need their voice in the public square more. We need to hear them. You have a very charming thing called the Grad Slam, not Grand Slam.
The Grad Slam.
But you have these graduate students and researchers doing a 3-minute elevator talk, like a turbo TED talk, about their work. And I watched some of them, and I go, wow.
Weren't they incredible?
They were incredible.
Yeah. So we're trying to have an environment where research and innovation and creativity are really encouraged. And so last year we started the Grad Slam. There was a competition on each campus, and then the finalists came to Oakland. And the panel of judges included like the Oakland mayor, included one or two of our alumni, but really a lay person's panel. And the idea was, just as you said, Lorraine, is describe your research in 3 minutes or less in a way that a layperson could understand it. And they're online. You can watch them on YouTube or wherever, and they're great.
I thought it was really inspiring. So now I know what you'll be doing for the next couple of years, because it's a huge system, and it really is an engine that will drive California forward on many levels. I need to just step back to your speech when you resigned as Cabinet Secretary for Homeland Security, because it set my hair on fire. A few of your little helpful hints. You warned us about domestic terrorists, and your words have just been proven correct year after year, alas. Natural disasters and cyber attacks. So what, as you look back at everything you learned in that job, what should we worry about?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the things I've come to appreciate is that the United States there's a lot that goes on that we don't see to protect people living in the United States, and that's important to do. But nonetheless, there are no guarantees in life, and there's no way to eliminate all risk. So what you have to do is say, well, what are the things that are most predominant? What can we do to mitigate those risks? How do we educate people to help, to be part of use the cliche, part of the solution, not part of the problem? But in the Department of Homeland Security, of course, it was created in the wake of the attack of 9/11, and its first mission is the anti-terrorism mission, the counterterrorism mission. And that includes not just Al-Qaeda and the spin-off groups, but other different groups that evolve over time. It's not static. And then, of course, the homegrown terrorists. And that's something that we've seen take place, unfortunately, over the past years. Cyber and cyber attacks was something that became more and more on our minds during my time as secretary, as we saw the frequency of attacks on our systems increase, and as we began to analyze how the infrastructure of the United States was not as adequately protected as it needed to be. And so that has become, I think, a larger risk factor for the United States. And then natural disasters. Now, there's not a lot we can do to, as you said, prevent. We can't prevent a hurricane. We can't prevent a tornado. But we can do a good job at preparing our communities for those things. And we can do a good job at being able to respond and get communities back on their feet when those kinds of things happen. And that's about building resilience within the United States population, the ability to understand that sometimes risks manifest themselves, bad stuff happens, and but we are a strong people and we come back.
Well, speaking of coming back, how does it feel to be back in New Mexico? And do you come here often? Do you still have family here?
Dad passed away just a couple years ago, so he was my last family member here, unfortunately. But I still come back to New Mexico. I love it here. And one of the things I come back for, of course, is the opera in the summer up in Santa Fe. We saw Cold Mountain and Rigoletto last summer. They were terrific.
Yeah.
I've already got my calendar out looking at next summer, seeing what the program is, but I've been doing that for years.
Well, when you do come back, we want to talk with you again because we had so much to talk about today. Are there any programs with our universities and the University of California? Do you do any satellites, or are you just a unit unto itself, all 10 campuses?
I don't know of any specific programs, say, with UNM or New Mexico State, but we're so huge. That doesn't mean there aren't any.
Yeah.
It just means that I don't know about them. And, in the research world, researchers are in touch,
Oh, yeah.
all the time between institutions and through their national associations and the like. So I'm quite confident there's good linkage at that level between members of our faculty and the faculties here in New Mexico.
And we just have a minute left, but accessibility to higher ed is something you've always been in favor of, as is now finally really becoming an issue in the presidential campaign. The University of California supports its students if a parent's income is, what's the ceiling, and then
If a family income is less than $80,000, we have something called the Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan, and that means their young person pays no tuition at the University of California. So that means that 55% of our California undergraduates do not pay any tuition.
What a gift! That's the best education in the world.
It is great, and it goes exactly to what I was saying. Is public higher education has been the one tried and true strategy over the course of United States history since the mid-19th century that has really helped succeeding generations be able to do better than their parents and their grandparents.
Well, again, in the campaign, there's issues of maybe having at least junior college education, some college education free to all students, the way they do in some European countries. You think we'll ever get there? You're halfway there with 55%
right
of your students.
But the way we pay for those 55% is we charge tuition to the others and to out-of-state students who come to the University
and
of California.
Internationally, you must have a huge international.
And we have a large international student population. So I'm encouraged that there's at least some discussion of the role of higher education, be it 2-year or 4-year. There's lots of different ways to do higher education in the United States now, lots of different models. Having it be free would be great. I do have to ask the question, well, then who pays for what? Because what we've seen in the United States is that since the recession, 2008, funding for public higher education has been dramatically reduced. In California, I have to assume in New Mexico as well. So public schools are trying to come back from that because in terms of size and scale, they represent the vast majority of students, college students in the country. So the question remains, at some point there has to be someone who's willing to support it.
Well, we've come to the end of our show. I want to thank you for your years of public service as governor of Arizona, as attorney general in Arizona, as former cabinet secretary for Homeland Security, and now president of the University of California.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us. Our guest is Janet Napolitano.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.